I remember the way the morning light spilled across my kitchen table, how it lit up the stack of unopened mail like a spotlight on a stage. I had just finished rinsing out my coffee mug, still in my robe, still half asleep, when I sat down to sort through bills and circulars, electricity, phone, an old magazine offer addressed to my late husband, Harold. I was halfway through the pile when I saw it, an envelope, white, official-looking, stamped in deep blue with the logo Northwestern Trust Bank. I frowned. I hadn't done any business with them ever. I set it aside, at first thinking it was just another promo, but something about it tugged at me. Maybe it was the way my name was printed, Mrs. June Halberd, no middle initial. That's how it appears on official documents, not casual mail. I opened it. The letter was crisp and clinical. Dear Mrs. Halberd, this is a formal reminder that your second monthly mortgage payment in the amount of $3,112.42 on the property at 1296 Harbour Ridge Lane is now overdue. Please remit payment within 14 days to avoid penalty and potential foreclosure. I stopped reading. I couldn't breathe. Mortgage. Harbour Ridge Lane. I live on Claymore Street. Have lived there for 42 years. My home was paid off in full nearly 2 decades ago. Harold and I had celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne and tears in our eyes. There had never been another mortgage. There wasn't supposed to be. I felt dizzy. My stomach turned. $812,000. That was the amount on the bottom of the statement. A loan apparently in my name for more money than I'd ever earned in my life. I grabbed the phone and dialed the number on the letter with trembling fingers. A young man picked up chipper and polite. Northwestern Trust Bank, how can I help you today? Yes, hello. This is June Halberd. I received a letter this morning about a missed mortgage payment, but I think there's been a mistake. I've never taken out a loan with your bank. There was a pause. I could hear keys tapping. Then, one moment, please, ma'am. Let me verify your file. I stared out the window while I waited. My garden looked the same as always. The bird feeder was swinging slightly in the breeze. But inside, I felt a storm coming. Thank you for waiting, Mrs. Halberd, he said when he returned. According to our records, you applied for a mortgage loan in the amount of $812,000 on February 9th. The loan was approved and closed on February 16th. It was for a property at 1296 Harbour Ridge Lane in Westlake. That's impossible, I said. I never applied for any such thing. That isn't even my address. I've never lived in Westlake. I understand, he replied carefully. However, we do have signed documents including scanned copies of your driver's license, social security number, and recent tax returns. If there's been some kind of fraud, I'd recommend visiting your local police department and also contacting our fraud investigations team. But legally, ma'am, you are currently responsible for the payments unless proven otherwise. My hands were shaking when I hung up. Fraud. Someone had stolen my identity. I stood there for a long moment, the letter crumpled in my hand. My breath was shallow. My heart was pounding. How could this happen? Who had access to my documents? Who would even think to do such a thing? And then a thought crossed my mind so sharp and sudden that it nearly knocked the wind out of me. Stephanie, my daughter. I hated myself for even thinking it, but the signs were there, weren't they? The last few times I'd seen her, she had made a few snide remarks about my paper clutter. I'd noticed her snooping near the cabinet, where I kept the important documents, just looking for stamps, she'd said. And last month she had joked, only half-joked, that I should consider putting the house in her name for simplicity's sake. I had brushed it off at the time. Stephanie had always been driven ambitious, quick to dismiss things she considered old-fashioned, including, it seemed, me. Still, it couldn't be her, could it? The phone rang again as if summoned by my thoughts. I didn't even look at the caller ID before picking up. Mum Stephanie's voice was bright, breathless. Don't forget Emily's piano recital is tomorrow at 3, okay? And please, for the love of God, don't wear that green cardigan. Stephanie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you, by any chance, use my information for anything recently? Like, financial stuff? There was a pause, too long. What are you talking about, Mom? I got a letter from a bank today. A mortgage payment notice. For a loan I never took. for a house I've never seen. Another pause. I could hear the shift in her tone even before she spoke again. Oh my God, not this again. Are you sure it's not another one of those credit card scams? You always overreact. Just toss it out. No, I said. This is different. You're being paranoid, she said. You really shouldn't stress yourself like this. Remember what your doctor said about your blood pressure. She was using that voice. The one she used when I asked too many questions. The one that made me feel like I was slipping into irrelevance. Stephanie, I said quietly, I'm going to the police. There was another long silence. Then, Mom, please don't do anything crazy. Let me come by tonight, okay? We'll talk. Just wait. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at the silent phone in my hand. I knew that voice, I knew that tone, and I knew deep down that something was very, very wrong. That evening, I found myself pacing the hallway like I hadn't done in years. The same hallway where Harold used to leave his muddy boots. The same place where Stephanie once taped her art projects with crooked pieces of Scotch tape, begging me to keep them up forever. Funny how memory lingers in places we think we've outgrown. By the time the doorbell rang, it was nearly 7 p.m. I opened it to see Stephanie standing there in a crisp beige blazer and pumps too high for walking. She looked expensive, tired but polished. Hi, Mom, she said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. She smelled like designer perfume and stress. I closed the door behind her. Let me see the letter, she said, setting her purse on the kitchen table like she owned the house. Her voice was firm. Not panicked, not curious firm. I handed her the envelope. She unfolded the letter with manicured fingers and scanned the contents faster than I thought anyone could read. She didn't say a word for several seconds. Then, finally softly, it's probably some kind of mix-up, or a scam. These things happen all the time. It's not a scam, I said. They have my name, my social, my signature, my tax records. Stephanie folded the letter back up slowly and set it down. Her face was carefully blank. Okay, she said. Let me make a few calls. I know someone at Northwestern. Maybe he can help us figure this out. You mean fix it, I said. You mean make it go away? She blinked. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything I said, but my voice betrayed me. It trembled, cracked under the weight of what I wasn't quite ready to say. Mom, she said, that performative sweetness creeping in. Don't do this. Don't start imagining things. I'm not imagining anything, I snapped. I looked up the address. The house they bought with that loan. It's in Westlake. Lakefront property. New construction. I saw the listing. Stephanie stiffened. And I noticed your car, I added. Didn't you used to drive a Camry? When did you get an Escalade? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the letter and folded it carefully back into the envelope. You don't have to worry about this. I'll handle it. No, I said. That's not how this works. I want the truth. Stephanie sighed dramatically, stood up and slung her purse over her shoulder. You always do this. You overthink everything. You create problems where there aren't any. I stood too. And you always deflect. You always make me feel like I'm crazy when I'm not. Her eyes flashed. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From embarrassing yourself. No, I said, my voice lower now. You're trying to protect yourself. And if you had nothing to do with this, you'd be angry right now. Outraged. You wouldn't be this quiet. She didn't answer. She walked to the door and opened it. I'll be in touch, she said over her shoulder. And then she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the living room couch with the lamp on Harold's old robe wrapped around my shoulders, the letter beside me, like some cursed object I couldn't throw away. I kept playing the conversation over and over in my mind, the tightness in Stephanie's jaw, the way her eyes darted away when I mentioned the address, the fact that she didn't deny it. The truth sat in my chest like a stone. I couldn't prove it yet, but in my gut I knew. She had done it. She had taken my information, taken my trust, and used it to buy herself a better life. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, a mistake, a misunderstanding. But that hope was thinning like cheap fabric, and what frightened me most was the ease in her voice, the calm, the way she brushed it off like a smudge on her perfect white blouse. The next morning, I made an appointment at the police department. But before I went, I knew I needed to understand exactly what had happened. I walked into my study, turned on the computer my son Michael had given me last Christmas, so I wouldn't be left behind, and typed the address again. 1296 Harbour Ridge Lane, Westlake. Up came images of a gleaming two-story home with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound porch facing the lake. Slate grey siding, designer landscaping, a stainless steel grill already installed on the patio. Estimated value, $875,000. I scrolled through the listing photos. A fireplace that looked like it had never been lit. A walk-in closet with custom shelving. A baby blue bedroom with a mural of hot air balloons. It hit me like a slap. That was Emily's favorite motif since she was 4. I sat back in my chair. The house wasn't just for investment. They were living there. Stephanie, her husband, Alec, and Emily, living in a house bought with stolen money. And not just anyone's money, mine. By noon, I was dressed and out the door, documents in my purse and my heart pounding. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a target, a victim, and I wasn't going to stay quiet. The police station smelled like old coffee and bleach. I stood at the front counter, clutching the letter in one hand and my driver's license in the other. A young officer with a buzz cut and eyes far too tired for his age took my statement down word for word, typing with 2 fingers. Identity theft. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Someone used my personal documents to take out a mortgage for over $800,000. He nodded, not looking up. Family member. I hesitated. Likely, I said finally, my daughter, Stephanie Halberd. He gave me a look, then a flicker of something. Not surprise, not sympathy, just recognition. As though he'd heard it all before. Maybe he had. He asked a few more questions, handed me a copy of the report, and told me a detective would follow up. Then he turned back to his computer and called for the next person in line. And just like that, I was back out in the sun. Legal complaint filed, still feeling like none of it was real. Back home, I called my son Michael. Not because I expected comfort, but because I needed to hear how far the rot had spread. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, Mom, what's up? I launched right into it. There's been fraud, Michael. Someone took out a mortgage in my name for a house I didn't buy. I think your sister did it. There was silence, then a sigh. Come on, Mom, don't start this. I'm not starting anything, I snapped. I went to the police. I filed a report. This is real. More silence, then a change in tone. You filed a report. Are you serious? You knew I asked. No, I mean, Steph mentioned something about a family agreement a while ago. I didn't ask. I thought you two had talked. We didn't, I said flatly. She forged my signature. She used my social security number. She stole from me. Michael muttered something under his breath. She just wanted a better house. It was a temporary fix. She said she'd pay everything off. With my name on the line, I said, my credit, my home. He didn't answer. Did you really think I'd be okay with that? I thought. He sighed again. I thought maybe you were finally helping for once. Those words hit me harder than I care to admit. Finally helping, as if I hadn't helped every day of their lives. As if raising them, feeding them, standing by them through bad marriages and worse decisions somehow didn't count. I hung up the phone. That evening, I stared at the mortgage documents again, every detail screaming violation. The signature wasn't even a good forgery. It curved where I always wrote straight. The loops were too wide. And yet the bank had accepted it. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. If the police couldn't act quickly, maybe someone else could. I searched online for elder fraud legal help and found a local name that kept popping up, Ruby Trent, attorney at law. Her tagline read, standing up for the ones they thought were too tired to fight. That hit me straight in the chest. I dialed the number. Her receptionist answered and scheduled an appointment for the next afternoon. I spent the rest of the evening gathering every official document I could find, my passport, my tax filings, my utility bills from February, when the loan had allegedly been signed. I even found my calendar from that week, a paper planner, the kind Stephanie always teased me about. On February 16th, the day the mortgage was supposedly closed, I had a full day of back-to-back appointments at Mercy General Hospital for cardiac screening. I couldn't have been 2 places at once. The next day, I stepped into Ruby Trent's office. It wasn't what I expected. No marble floors, no sterile waiting room. Just warm wood tones, a potted fern near the window, and the faint scent of lemon tea. Ruby herself looked like the kind of woman who'd survived too much to care what anyone thought. Short grey curls, no makeup, deep smile lines, and a voice that could cut steel if necessary. "I'm glad you came in, Mrs. Halberd," she said after I told her everything. I handed her the mortgage notice, the forged signature, and my calendar. She studied each item carefully. "What you're describing," she said slowly, "is unfortunately common. And yes, it's fraud. The fact that it's your daughter doesn't change that. I don't want to put her in jail," I said. "I just want my name cleared, my home safe, my dignity back." Ruby nodded. "There are a few routes we can take," she explained. "We can report this through the court system with a civil suit. We can negotiate with the bank. Or we can go criminal." She paused. "I don't recommend deciding that right now. Let's build a file, get the evidence. Then you choose how far you want to take this." For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Someone believed me. Someone was on my side. "Good," I said. "Then let's begin." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Harold. He would have told me to stand tall, to fight with my head high and my hands steady. But Harold was gone, and I was the one left to defend what was mine. I wasn't ready for a war, but I was ready to stop pretending this wasn't one. Ruby was nothing like the lawyers I'd seen on television. She didn't wear tailored suits or speak in legal jargon just to sound clever. She had a silver ring on each hand, short-cut nails, and eyes that saw right through pretense. She listened the way very few people do anymore, with her full body, as if holding space for someone's truth was her vocation, not just her profession. We sat across from each other in her small office that smelled faintly of peppermint and old leather. A ceramic owl sat perched on the corner of her desk, and behind her was a bookshelf lined with paperbacks and binders. I handed her everything. I had my ID, my real signature, the letter from the bank, my medical paperwork from Mercy General, even a printed screenshot of the house listing. She scanned each document with the patience of someone familiar with messes left to fester too long. When she finally looked up, she spoke with deliberate calm. "Mrs. Halberd, what you're dealing with is a classic case of elder financial abuse, specifically identity theft committed by a family member. And while it may be difficult to admit, I'll tell you this, it's more common than you think." I swallowed hard. "She's my daughter," I said. "It feels like I'm betraying her just by sitting here." Ruby nodded. "I've heard that from every client in your situation, but here's what I always say. In return, your daughter made a choice the moment she crossed a legal line. You're not the one who broke trust. She is." I stared at my hands knotted tightly in my lap. They looked older than they used to, thinner-lined veins prominent under the skin. Harold used to call them graceful. Piano hands, he'd say, even though I never played. "I was at the hospital the day they say I signed the mortgage," I said. "I had 3 tests and a consultation with the cardiologist. I was there all day." "That's excellent," Ruby said immediately, scribbling into her notes. "We'll subpoena the records. That will serve as an airtight alibi." She leaned forward. "But the most important piece is your signature. Do you have anything else you've signed recently? Bank checks, lease renewals, even old letters. I have a passport and my driver's license here. The rest is at home." "That'll do for now. We'll request a forensic handwriting analysis. The courts take that seriously." There was a long pause. "I know this is a lot," she added gently, "but you're not alone in this. I'll be with you every step of the way. The question is, what outcome are you hoping for?" I looked up. "I want the loan erased. I want my name cleared. And I want her to know she can't do this to me." Ruby held my gaze. "Do you want her prosecuted?" The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out an old photo Stephanie, at 9 years old, holding a science fair ribbon, beaming up at the camera, gap-toothed and unguarded. "She used to be kind," I said, "back then." Ruby didn't reply. She didn't need to. Over the next week, we worked like clockwork. Ruby drafted official letters to Northwestern Trust. We requested the loan application, the officer who processed it, and all supporting documentation. She also submitted requests to the county clerk to obtain records on the property at 1296 Harbour Ridge Lane. 3 days later, she called me. June, she said, her voice firm. We found the buyer. The property isn't in Stephanie's name directly. It's registered under a shell company, Waverley Holdings LLC. I didn't recognize the name. But guess what she added? It was established 3 weeks before the loan closed. The registered agent is June Halberd, your son-in-law. I sat in stunned silence. They created a company just to hide the purchase, Ruby continued. Which makes it a deliberate concealment of assets. This isn't an accident. This is a scheme. I pressed my hand to my chest. My heartbeat was rapid. I don't understand, I whispered. Why go to so much trouble? Why not just ask me? Because asking gives you the chance to say no, Ruby said. People like your daughter, they don't ask. They take. The next day, I received an email from the bank. Attached was the loan agreement scanned and signed. The signature was mine, but not. The slant was too steep. The loop on the H was exaggerated. It looked like someone had practiced it a few times and finally gotten close enough. Close enough to convince a bank that an old woman wanted to mortgage a non-existent second home. My blood boiled. I forwarded the document to Ruby. Within the hour, she replied with a single sentence. I think it's time we prepare a lawsuit. That night, I sat by the window with a mug of tea and stared at the street lamp outside. My neighborhood was quiet like always. Familiar, safe, and yet nothing felt safe anymore. I thought of Emily, my granddaughter. The way she used to braid my hair when she was small, her tiny fingers fumbling with strands. What would she think years from now when she found out what her mother had done? Would she understand? Would she blame me? I set the tea down and opened my notebook. I wrote one sentence at the top of a clean page. What happens to love when it's betrayed by blood? No answer came. Just silence. Just the rustling of trees and the hollow echo of a life cracking open. But deep inside me, I knew something else had shifted. I wasn't just surviving this. I was going to fight. The following morning, I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, a place I rarely visited, and pulled out an old photo album wrapped in soft muslin. The corners were frayed. The spine cracked. It had sat undisturbed for nearly a decade, ever since Harold passed. I flipped through the pages with gentle fingers. There we were in our 20s, standing in front of the small house we bought on Claymore Street. He had one arm around me, and the other holding up the deed like it was a lottery ticket. We'd just signed the mortgage papers that day, 42 years ago. That house was our foundation. Every corner held echoes, birthdays, flu seasons, arguments over burnt casseroles, the quiet moment he first called me kiddo after my mother died. And now someone my own daughter had turned our history into leverage for her lifestyle. I pressed my palm over Harold's photo. What would you do, Harold? I whispered. In my heart, I already knew. Later that day, Ruby and I met again. She'd requested my hospital records from February 16th, and they'd just arrived. You were at Mercy General from 8:10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., she said. Cardiac stress test blood work, a follow-up with Dr. Kelso. You even signed a check-in sheet. That's proof you couldn't have signed any loan papers at the bank that day. She tapped her pen on the folder. It's airtight. Combine that with the forged signature and the shell company ownership, and we've got a clear case. I nodded slowly. Then let's proceed. What happens next? Ruby laid it out simply. We'd file a civil suit accusing Stephanie of fraudulent misrepresentation, identity theft, and financial abuse of an elder. We'd also request a temporary court injunction to freeze any bank collection attempts on the loan until the case was resolved. But she warned, once the papers are served, things will get louder. Messier, you may lose more than your daughter. I thought of Michael, of how quickly he'd dismissed me, of how distant they'd both been since Harold died. And then I thought of something Harold used to say when he worked double shifts at the plant to put food on the table. If you let people walk on you, once they'll pave a road through your soul. No more roads, I thought. I'm ready, I said. A week later, Ruby called with something unexpected. There's going to be a party, she said. I blinked. A what? A housewarming party. For the house in Westlake. Your granddaughter's school friend is related to a server at the catering company. That's how it got back to me. I sat down slowly. A party. They were celebrating with canapes and champagne inside the house bought with my forged signature. She's having a party for stolen property, I said aloud. Yes, Ruby replied, and we have an opportunity here. Her tone sharpened. Do you want her served during the party? I hesitated. Would that be too cruel, too public? Then I remembered Stephanie's calm voice the night she brushed it off. The new SUV, her eyes avoiding mine. She didn't even invite me, I whispered. She didn't even think I deserved to see it. Ruby didn't push. The silence sat between us like a test. And then I said yes, serve her at the party. The night before the housewarming, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared out the window. The moon was full, casting a pale light across the lawn where Harold used to mow perfect stripes. I missed his voice, his quiet steadiness. He would have hated this, the betrayal, the spectacle, but he would have stood beside me. At some point, I drifted into memory. A quiet summer evening. Years ago, me and Harold sitting on the back steps with glasses of iced tea. The kids had just gone to bed. He turned to me and said, "Promise me something, June." "What?" "If I go first, promise me you won't let them treat you like you're done." I laughed. "What does that even mean?" "It means," he said, "you matter. Even when they forget, don't let them take your voice." The next morning, I woke up early and stood in front of my closet. I pulled out a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in years. I curled my hair. I chose the pearl earrings Harold had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wasn't going to war, but I wasn't going in silence either. Ruby picked me up in a nondescript car just before 5:30 p.m. A professional process server named Marlin was with her tall quiet, dressed like he belonged at any upscale event. He held a discreet envelope tucked into a black leather folder. "Are you sure?" Ruby asked one last time. I nodded. We parked near the edge of Lakeview Terrace. The houses gleamed like magazine covers. Perfect hedges, curated porches, wind chimes that didn't dare make noise. Stephanie's house stood out. 2 stories, fresh white paint bay windows wide open. We could hear music drifting from inside. Laughter, wine glasses clinking. We waited until the guests had settled in. Then we walked toward the house together, me, Ruby, and Marlin. I clutched my purse tight, but my shoulders were square. Let them stare, I thought. Let them all see the woman they thought was too old, too soft, too easy to fool. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here to take back my name. The walkway to the house was lined with gold-trimmed candles in glass jars. Someone had gone all-out little welcome signs in cursive script string lights woven around the porch railing and a white balloon arch over the door that read, "Home Sweet Home." I stopped just before the threshold. The irony made my teeth hurt. "Ready?" Ruby asked. I nodded, even though my hands trembled. I'd fought wars quieter than this grief, loneliness, invisibility, but never one where I walked into the lion's den wearing pearls and memories. Marlin stepped forward first. He was carrying a tray of canapes, now playing the part of a late-arriving catering staffer. "I'll find her," he said. "When you hear her name come in." It only took 2 minutes. From the open doorway, we heard it clearly. Mrs. Stephanie Halberd Caldwell. Marlin's voice sliced through the background chatter like a cold knife. I stepped over the threshold. Stephanie stood near the fireplace, a champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. Her dress cream silk fitted shimmered under the recessed lights. People around her fell silent as Marlin held out the envelope. "You're being served." The room exhaled a collective gasp. Stephanie's eyes widened as she spotted me behind him. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. "You," she whispered. "You came here." I stepped forward slowly, my heels clicking on the tile. "I came," I said softly, "because it's my name on the papers that paid for this house." A woman near the cheese board coughed awkwardly. Glasses clinked. Someone whispered, "Is that her mother?" Stephanie's husband Alex stepped into the circle. His face was a mixture of confusion and brewing panic. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. "What lawsuit?" "Ask your wife," I said. "Ask her how she bought a house with someone else's identity." Stephanie turned crimson. "Mom, please, not here." This is exactly where I interrupted. "You made this public when you used my name, my records, my credit without asking. You brought this into my life. Now it's in yours." She snatched the envelope from Marlin's hand and clutched it like it might catch fire. Alec tried to read over her shoulder, but she jerked away. "This is insane," she muttered. "You're making a scene." "No," I said. "You made the crime. I'm just responding." The party unraveled quickly. Guests murmured excuses and began to leave. A few offered Stephanie awkward hugs. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Someone spilled wine on the rug in their hurry to exit. Alec looked pale. Steph, he said you told me your mother agreed to help. You said she co-signed, that it was a family decision. Stephanie said nothing. He turned to me helpless. Is that not true? I stared at him, measured. Do I look like a woman who would take out an $800,000 loan at 70 years old for a second home I've never even seen? His silence was answer enough. Behind me, Ruby placed a steadying hand on my back. You can leave now, Stephanie hissed, her composure cracking. You've done your damage. No, I said. You did. You broke trust. You stole my identity. And worst of all, you didn't think I mattered enough to even ask. Her voice shook. You'll ruin us. You ruined yourself, I replied. Then I turned to leave. But I hadn't made it to the front door when I heard a voice from the stairwell. Grandma, I froze. Emily stood halfway down the stairs, clutching the railing, eyes wide and confused. What's going on, she asked. Why are people leaving? Stephanie rushed toward her. Sweetheart, go back upstairs. No, I said, stopping her with my hand. She deserves to know the truth. Maybe not tonight, but someday. Emily looked between the two of us, her mother flushed and trembling, and her grandmother in pearls and war paint. She was old enough to understand something had gone wrong, maybe even old enough to sense who was telling the truth. I left without another word. Outside, the night was strangely quiet. The porch lights from other houses blinked gently, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through number 1296. Ruby helped me into the car. You okay? She asked. No, I said honestly, but I will be. Back at home, I changed out of the dress and carefully hung it back in its plastic cover. I poured a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the table, letting silence drape over me like a familiar quilt. I had done what I said I would. I had stood up in front of everyone and taken back my voice. But now came the waiting, the counterattacks, the loneliness. Still I felt solid, like granite beneath my skin. Harold would have been proud. The next step was court, and I would face it head on. Because when your children forget who you are, sometimes you have to remind them, not with tears, but with consequences. For 3 days after the party, the phone didn't ring. No angry calls from Stephanie. No apologetic message from Michael. Not even a polite check-in from Alec or Emily. Just silence, thick, heavy, familiar. I'd lived in silence since Harold died, the kind that seeps into the walls and clings to your clothes. But this was different. This was the sound of walls breaking, of bonds unraveling. I thought I would cry. I didn't. Instead, I dusted off the old cedar box on my bookshelf, the one labeled Important Documents. I opened it and removed Harold's will, our mortgage papers, birth certificates, insurance policies. My life in pages. Everything I had ever built was in that box. Everything my daughter had gambled for a view of the lake. On the 4th day, Ruby called. Northwestern Trust has responded to our initial claim, she said. They've paused collection activity and agreed to cooperate pending further verification. That's good, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. They're also conducting an internal review, she added, on the loan officer who approved the application. Apparently he's someone from Stephanie's college years. I wasn't surprised. Everything about the transaction felt designed, as if Stephanie had mapped it out piece by piece, never doubting she could pull it off. After all, who would believe the old woman right? But now they would. Later that afternoon, as I trimmed the rose bushes, a familiar voice rang out behind me. Mom. I turned to find Michael standing at the gate, his hands in his pockets, his expression guarded. I wanted to talk, he said. I nodded and led him inside. He didn't sit, just stood awkwardly near the sink while I poured 2 glasses of water. His eyes wandered the kitchen like he barely recognized it anymore. Stephanie's a mess, he said finally. She's not eating. Alec moved into the guest room. I sipped my water. She made her choices. Michael winced. You humiliated her. At the party. No, I said calmly. She humiliated herself. I just held up a mirror. He stared at me, then exhaled sharply. You're really going through with the lawsuit. I already have. The papers were filed. He leaned against the counter, frustration flickering across his face. What do you want, Mom? An apology? A confession for her to lose her job? I want my name cleared, I said. I want justice. And I want her to understand that what she did was wrong, not because she got caught, but because it violated every bond we ever had. He rubbed his jaw. "You're going to destroy this family." "This family," I said, "was already broken the moment you both stopped seeing me as a person." That shut him up. He left 10 minutes later, muttering something about calling again. I didn't believe him, and I didn't need him to. That night, I pulled out Harold's favorite mug and poured myself a cup of coffee. I stood by the window, watching the rain streak across the glass. It reminded me of the day he died. Grey skies, soft thunder, the way the world didn't pause to acknowledge my loss. I whispered to him then, "I'm doing it, love. I'm standing up, even if no one claps, even if no one stays." And for the first time in a long while, I felt him there, not in the room, but in me, in the strength I didn't know I had. A few days later, Ruby called with another update. "The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing for next month," she said. "We'll begin by introducing the forgery evidence, your alibi, and financial records. And if Stephanie doesn't respond, she'll be held in default, and the court will likely rule in your favor." I nodded. Then I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. "Do you think she feels sorry?" Ruby paused. "I think she feels scared." "That's not the same thing." I knew she was right. Remorse was quiet, reflective. What I saw in Stephanie was desperation, a frantic clinging to the house, the reputation, the illusion. And illusions don't apologize. They crack, they collapse, and then they vanish. 1 week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Unmarked envelope, no return address. Inside was a card. Just 2 words written in my daughter's handwriting. "Please stop." No apology, no explanation. Just a plea for silence. I folded the card in half and placed it in the fireplace. And as the paper curled into ash, I said softly, "No more silence." The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old air. I arrived early, dressed in charcoal grey, and carrying a folder that Ruby had prepped with neat little tabs. She met me on the steps, a clipboard in hand, her silver hair tied back tighter than usual. "You okay?" she asked, scanning my face. "As okay as anyone can be when suing their own daughter," I replied. Ruby nodded. "Let's make sure it counts." Inside the courtroom was modest, no grand marble pillars, or dramatic spotlights like the ones you see on television. Just wood-paneled walls, pew-style benches, and a raised bench where the judge would soon sit. Stephanie entered 15 minutes later. She looked thinner, tired. Her hair was pulled into a hasty bun, and she wore minimal makeup. She didn't glance in my direction. Her lawyer followed, young, expensive-looking briefcase practically glowing with confidence. He whispered something to her, and she nodded once, arms folded tightly across her chest. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a low voice, entered and called the room to order. The trial had begun. Ruby opened our side with a quiet, methodical tone. She wasn't dramatic, she didn't need to be. The evidence did the speaking. She presented my medical records from the day of the supposed loan signing, 3 appointments at Mercy General, documented by name and time. She introduced the forensic handwriting expert's report. The signature on the loan documents bore no significant consistency with mine. The loop slants and pressure patterns didn't match. She showed the timeline of events, the shell company, Alec's name as the registered agent, the mortgage funds routed through Waverley Holdings, photos of the house, even screenshots of Stephanie and Alec attending the home inspection. The courtroom was silent. Then Stephanie's lawyer took his turn. He painted me as confused, a woman who may have offered verbal consent but now no longer recalls doing so. He emphasized my age, my health records, my long-standing relationship with my daughter. Stephanie kept her eyes fixed on the table the whole time. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I stood. I didn't look at Stephanie. I looked at the judge and I spoke clearly. I did not agree to this loan. I did not sign those papers. And I did not raise my daughter to treat people like pawns. I paused. She used me. She risked my home, my credit, and my sense of self because she assumed I wouldn't fight back. I looked over at Ruby and gave a small nod. But I am fighting back. After court adjourned for the day, Stephanie brushed past me in the hallway. "Is this what you wanted?" she snapped. "To watch me fall apart in front of strangers?" I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I wanted my daughter to respect me. And when she didn't, I wanted the law to remember I exist." She said nothing. That evening, Ruby called with updates. "The judge has scheduled closing arguments for next week," she said. "I don't see them winning." Not with this much evidence. But what happens next, I asked, after the verdict? Well, she said slowly, if we win the loan, we'll be cancelled. The house could be seized. Your name will be cleared. And criminal charges? That depends on whether the bank chooses to pursue them. We've laid the groundwork, but we're not the prosecutors. I sat at my kitchen table long after we hung up. I wasn't sure what victory would feel like. It wouldn't bring back the trust. It wouldn't bring back the child I used to know. But maybe it would bring back something else. A version of me I had forgotten. The one who didn't flinch. The next morning I found an envelope slipped through my door. No stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a letter. Mom, I know you won't believe this, but I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted more for Emily. For me. I thought I could make it work before you found out. I thought I could protect you from it, but maybe I just wanted to protect myself. If you go through with this, you'll ruin what little we have left. Please reconsider. Stephanie. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. I wasn't going to respond. Some bridges don't burn because we light a match. They burn because the other person drenched them in gasoline and walked away first. The day of the verdict arrived under a pale, cloudy sky. I wore a simple navy dress and the brooch Harold gave me for our 30th anniversary, an oval garnet set in filigree. A reminder perhaps that love once lived here, that I was once surrounded by a family that made me feel whole. Ruby met me on the courthouse steps. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her presence was like a warm wall behind me, silent, solid, reassuring. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with tension. Stephanie sat across from me, her jaw-clenched, shoulders square. Alec wasn't there. Neither was Michael. I couldn't help but notice the empty seat beside her, the one where Emily used to sit during her piano recitals. The judge entered and called the room to order. She adjusted her glasses, looked at both of us, and began reading from the written judgment. Her voice was measured, emotionless, but the words felt like thunder. The court finds compelling evidence of identity theft and fraudulent misrepresentation. The plaintiff has proven beyond reasonable doubt that her signature was forged and her personal data unlawfully used to obtain a mortgage loan for the benefit of the defendant. Stephanie's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Stephanie stared straight ahead. Accordingly, this court rules in favor of Mrs. June Halberd. The mortgage agreement is hereby declared null and void. Northwestern Trust Bank shall remove all associated obligations from her name. My breath caught. The judge continued. Additionally, the defendant is ordered to pay $20,000 in restitution for emotional damages and breach of fiduciary duty. The matter of criminal prosecution is left to the discretion of the financial institution. She paused. Let this serve as a reminder that family ties, while sacred, do not exempt one from the law. The gavel struck once, and just like that, it was over. I didn't look at Stephanie as I gathered my things. I didn't need to. I could feel her eyes on me, burning, daring me to say something. But I had said everything that mattered in court, with proof, with boundaries. Outside the courthouse, Ruby and I stood under the awning as a light rain began to fall. You did it, she said. I did, I replied. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a burial. That night, the bank sent me a formal letter confirming the loan had been wiped from my credit. They also informed me they would be initiating proceedings to seize the house to recover their losses. Stephanie would lose her dream home. The housewarming lights would go dark. Emily would have to move again. And yes, the thought ached somewhere deep inside me, but not for Stephanie. For the girl I used to know, the one who used to ask me to braid her hair before school, the one who cried when her favorite teacher moved away, the one who once slipped a note into my coat pocket that said, "You're my hero." That girl was gone. 2 days later, Audrey came over with fresh banana bread and a stack of newspapers. Page 7, she said, tapping the Concord Gazette. Right under the city council debate and the obituaries, the headline read, Elder wins identity theft case against daughter. House seized by bank. My name was in print. So was hers. I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel vindication. I felt visible. For the first time in years, people saw me not as a burden, not as a frail retiree, not as some dotty old woman, but as a person who stood up. Later that evening, I received a voicemail. Stephanie. Her voice was hoarse, exhausted. I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything. Alex leaving. Emily won't speak to me. We're being evicted next month. I hope you can live with yourself. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I pressed delete, because I could live with myself. That was the whole point. The next morning, I made coffee and stared out at my modest backyard. The maple tree Harold planted was shedding its leaves again, gold rust, fire red. I opened the window and let the autumn air in. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting. I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. The fight was over, but something else was just beginning. The days that followed the verdict passed in a strange kind of quiet. No more lawyers, no more threats, no more letters pretending to be reminders. Just the echo of what used to be a family, now fractured into pieces I couldn't put back together. Michael didn't call again. Stephanie didn't write. But word spread. In a small town like ours, stories travel faster than sense. Neighbors nodded with sympathy when I passed by on my morning walk. Some asked questions, others kept their distance. But I knew what they all whispered behind their closed doors. She sued her own daughter. They said it like I was the villain. But none of them had been there at my kitchen table holding that cursed letter, feeling their identity slip away one forged signature at a time. They didn't know what it felt like to walk into a house your own daughter stole with your name. Audrey dropped by one afternoon with a tin of almond cookies. "You've become a legend, Winnie," she said with a grin. "At Bridge Club, no one talks about arthritis anymore. It's all, did you hear about June Halberd taking her daughter to court and winning?" I laughed, though it didn't reach my eyes. "It doesn't feel like winning." Audrey sat down, her eyes warm. "That's because winning isn't about gloating. It's about surviving without losing yourself." I looked out the window. The leaves had started to fall. "She said I ruined everything," I murmured. "Did you?" Audrey asked gently. "No, I think I stopped the ruin from going any further." She nodded. "Exactly." A few weeks later, I received a letter from the bank. They had seized the property at 1296 Harbour Ridge Lane and scheduled it for foreclosure auction. The proceeds would go toward the unpaid balance of the fraudulent loan. It was done. Stephanie had officially lost the house. I didn't feel triumphant, I didn't gloat, but I did feel something like closure, or at least the beginning of it. One night, I received an unexpected knock at my door. I opened it to find Emily standing there. 14, taller, hair in a ponytail, eyes too old for her age. She held a small paper bag in her hands. "Hi, Grandma," she said. My heart jumped. I opened the door wider. "Hi, sweetheart." She stepped in and handed me the bag. Inside was a bracelet, not new, not shiny. It was the same one I'd given her at her birthday party. "I kept it," she said. "I just didn't know what to do with it then." I felt my eyes sting. "I didn't understand what was going on," she continued. "But now I do. Mom's mad at you. She says you ruined everything, but I think she ruined it herself." I didn't know what to say, so I took her into my arms and held her tightly. We sat in the kitchen for an hour. She told me about school, about how Alec had moved out, how her mom cried a lot at night. I didn't ask questions. I just listened. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "I know I'm just a kid, but I'm glad you didn't let her get away with it. You're braver than everyone thinks." I smiled through tears. "And you're kinder than everyone knows." She hugged me again. "I'll come back," she whispered. "I'll be here," I said. After she left, I took the bracelet from the bag and held it in my hands. A small thing, but maybe the beginning of healing. The next day, Ruby called. "I have some news," she said. Northwestern Trust has offered an additional settlement, $15,000 for the negligence in approving the fraudulent loan. They want to avoid further scrutiny. I blinked. Is that common? For cases like yours where public attention could damage their image? Yes. I paused. What should I do with the money? Ruby chuckled. That's the most beautiful question I've heard from you yet. That evening, I sat by the window watching the last of the leaves fall. I thought about all the years I gave, all the sacrifices, all the quiet I allowed. And then I thought about what came next. A life not defined by my children, but by me. I was free, and I intended to use it. A week after the final settlement was deposited into my account, Audrey came over with a brochure. Community Center activities, it read. Fall session Italian for beginners, digital literacy, yoga for seniors, watercolor workshop. She held it up like a winning lottery ticket. "You, my dear," she said, "are going to pick something. Anything. You've earned it. I laughed. Is there a class for starting over at 71? Every single one of these is, she said, eyes sparkling. I chose two. Computer skills, because I'd had enough of feeling helpless when opening emails or navigating bank portals. And watercolor, because something inside me longed to make something again. Not for someone else, just for me. The first class was awkward. My fingers felt too slow, my memory too stubborn. But I wasn't the only one. Around me were others, just like me, widows, retirees, some recently divorced. All of us searching for something quietly, connection, purpose, the courage to begin again. At the end of class, the instructor handed out an assignment paint, something that means freedom to you. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my beginner's kit and thought long and hard. Then with unsteady hands, I painted a window. Not a house, not a lake, a window. Cracked open, light pouring in. Audrey clapped when she saw it. Look at you, Picasso. It's just a sketch, I said. No, she replied. It's proof. Of what? That you're not broken. That you're still becoming. Stephanie didn't reach out again. Neither did Michael. The silence had settled into something less painful. Like scar tissue. You remember how it got there, but it no longer bleeds. Emily visited twice more. Once with cookies she had baked, the second time with a book she thought I'd like, The Secret Life of Bees. We didn't talk about her mother. We just existed together, safe in the truce of small kindnesses. I knew it wouldn't be easy for her. She was caught between two worlds. But she came anyway, and that mattered. One afternoon I received an invitation in the mail from the Concord Women's Association. They wanted me to speak on standing up for yourself after betrayal. I laughed out loud when I read it. Who would have thought? The woman once called too soft and too polite was now considered brave. I accepted. On the day of the talk, I stood at the podium, heart-pounding, palms damp. Dozens of women stared back at me, some younger, most older, all waiting for something honest. So I gave it to them. I was the kind of mother who bent, instead of breaking, I began. Who forgave too quickly, excused too much. Until one day, I looked up and realized that my kindness had been mistaken for permission. I paused, meeting their eyes. And when I finally said no, when I finally fought back, it wasn't because I stopped loving my children. It was because I remembered to love myself. Some nodded, some wept. Afterward, a woman approached me and whispered, "Thank you, I needed to hear that." I walked home under a pink dust sky, feeling a strange kind of peace. No one had clapped. No one threw roses at my feet. But someone had listened, and I had spoken. That night, I stood by the window again. The maple tree was bare now, its branches stretched skyward, like quiet prayers. I wasn't the same woman who once stood here, clutching a mortgage letter with shaking hands. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger. Not because she'd never been broken, but because she had finally stitched herself back together. And this time, the seams were hers. Winter crept into Concord with quiet dignity. Frost edged the windows in the mornings, and I had to dig Harold's old wool coat out of storage. The world moved on just as it always did. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. It wasn't just the absence of Stephanie's voice or Michael's name on my caller ID. It was the absence of waiting. I wasn't waiting for apologies anymore. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I wasn't waiting for someone else to validate my life. One morning, I passed the bakery on Main Street and saw a help wanted sign in the window. Not for myself, of course, but I paused anyway. There was something poetic about a small shop needing hands, needing warmth, needing presence, and for once I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a woman with choices. Later that afternoon, I met Audrey for tea. We sat in our usual booth by the window, a plate of scones between us, steam curling up from our mugs. "I think I want to travel," I said, stirring honey into my cup. "Italy, maybe. Or Scotland. Somewhere old and honest." Audrey grinned. "You've got that court money sitting idle. Might as well spend it on something other than cracked sidewalks and new gutters." "I'd invite Emily," I said softly, almost to myself. "Someday. If her heart still has room for me." "She's a good kid," Audrey said. "You didn't lose her. You just stepped back far enough for her to find you again on her own terms." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I opened Harold's toolbox. Inside, everything was still as he'd left it, measuring tape socket wrenches, nails in a jam jar. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to feel close to something steady, to the version of myself that used to build a life, not just maintain the ruins of one. I found a small envelope taped to the bottom lid. To my surprise, it was addressed to me in Harold's handwriting. June, in case you ever need reminding, you are the backbone of this family. Even if the kids forget, I never did. If you're reading this, it means something hard has happened. And if I know you, you'll face it with grace even if it breaks your heart. Don't let them turn your silence into consent. Speak when they try to shame you. Fight when they try to corner you. And walk away when they no longer deserve you. Always with you, H. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down and wept not from grief but from recognition. He saw me. Even in death, he saw the woman I was becoming. A week later, I walked past Stephanie's old house. The for sale sign was gone. A new couple was moving in, a young woman with a red scarf and a man with a guitar case. They smiled at me from the porch. I smiled back. That house wasn't haunted anymore. It wasn't hers. It wasn't mine. It was simply someone else's beginning. And I had mine too. In the spring, I booked 2 tickets to Venice. Not because I wanted to escape, but because I wanted to celebrate. Audrey agreed to come without hesitation. Only if we get matching journals, she said, so we can write down the mischief we get into. We did. On the plane, I sat by the window, watching clouds drift beneath us, like old regrets finally letting go. I didn't know what would come next, not entirely, but I knew who I was bringing with me. Not the broken mother, not the woman deceived, not the silent widow, but the version of me who learned how to fight and how to forgive herself for not doing it sooner. As we touched down in Italy, I closed my eyes and whispered, "To all the women who waited too long, this one's for us."